I figured I'd do something a little bit different today and talk about how, as an instructor, I create real university courses. So I've had to do this several times over the past few years. Most of the time, I'm lucky enough to have another instructor who's taught the course, and I've been able to figure out what to do based on their syllabi. But this is the first time I'm creating a proposal for a new course to be taught this summer that hasn't been done before. So I'm stuck from absolute scratch with this. So I figured I'd go through my thought process and how I actually would design this. So this is going to be a sort of a work in progress as we go. This will be updated, of course, much before summer and as the semester goes on, if it happens. But for the time being, let's get into this. So the goal of this course is to teach about constructed languages and compare them to real languages. So constructed languages are these languages made by people. They're used in movies and books. It's very common in Dungeons and Dragons campaigns for people to make their own languages up and to have them build part of the world. So that's what this course is going to be about. I have a few sections I need to fill out, and this creates the outline for everything I'm going to do. So recommended reading, a description of the course, the objectives, how they're being assessed, the schedule for 13 weeks plus an exam period, details on the grading, and then of course a grade scale itself. So we're just going to do some outlining here, just talk about my thoughts. I do have some things already written in a document, but for the most part, this is also thinking on the spot. So when I create a course, usually one of the things I do is I look for textbooks that are good with information. Now on constructed languages, there is a textbook, but it's not really a textbook. It's more of a book on how people create them. It's written more casually. So it could be that I introduce this as recommended reading. So I don't have the actual name of this, but I'll say a casual conlang book. But I never require textbooks in my course because if I'm doing my job as an instructor, everything on the slides and the assignments, it should be enough to learn the material in the course. So it's something I'll have to check out to see if it's worth recommending because people might buy it. Now, for the course description, usually we got to write something that's like, hey, this is cool, like just to get people in what it's about. So, what we're exploring. So, when I think about what we're exploring in a course on constructed languages, I'm thinking of very popular languages like Elvish or Kenyan in Lord of the Rings. I'm thinking maybe about something like Parcel Tongue in Harry Potter, Harry Pooter. I might be thinking about, of course, the most common one, Star Trek, Klingon. And there can be other ones too. So, like for instance, I know in The Legend of Zelda, there's this language called Hylian. So maybe I should keep this consistent. And one of the interesting things about Hylian is that there's like 5 different stages of Hylian as you play through the game. So it starts from ancient Hylian and it modifies into one that's in the most future timeline. So there could be something in there. So this is what we're exploring. And I should mention also, of course, and more. So dot, 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 and also real languages to compare with constructed languages. So, okay, so we can do this. Usually in the course description, we give something about how lectures work, so what we're going to introduce in lectures. And the goal of this is really to learn about conlangs and how to compare them to real languages. So in order to do that, assuming this course is for people who have never taken linguistics before, lectures have some linguistic background, focus on the applied stuff more than the theoretical part. Uh, so we could explore those in real languages and then in conlangs just to get some ideas of how they work in the real world and how some conlangs use those. And when we think about real languages and constructed languages, there's some interesting stuff there because with real languages, they abide by these universal principles. So one thing that comes off the top of my head is that if languages have the sounds b, d, and g, so b, d, and g, they must have the sounds p, t, and k for p, t, and k. That's something that all real languages that are spoken in the real world as first languages have. But constructed languages don't have to do that. They don't have to follow real linguistic universals. So what I can do in this course is I can introduce those linguistic universals and I can contrast them with conlangs. What else might we be doing? So for assignments and stuff like that, well, of course, we want some sort of practical assignments looking at real languages and constructed languages. What else do we want? Well, it's a constructed language course, so create your own constructed language. That seems like a fun project, right? So, of course, this needs to be written up in more detail, but this is just an outline here. What I'm also thinking is because we have a constructed language project and the course is more focused on sort of the practicality and analysis, to also have some workshops here to work on parts of the constructed language and discuss progress, maybe something like that. We can see how workshops have to be changed in the future, but these are just preliminary ideas. Give students in every class an opportunity to start working on their projects and start analyzing things that we've taught in class so that way when they go home, they're not completely lost. So this is a general course description that I can work with. I can type this up a little bit later with nicer words, but these are my thoughts so far. So for course objectives, this is what people get out of the course. And there's two things I always consider. I always consider what does a linguistics major want? And what does someone who's not a linguistics major want? So I need to give enough theoretical information to help people who are continuing on. But I need to give some sort of practical application or skill set to students who are just taking this course out of interest. Because if they're paying for a course, which on average would be $700 a student for this course, um, they need to get something out of their money other than just a grade. They need to get a skill set or something. So there's some obvious course objectives, which would be course content, real versus conlangs, things like that. But we could also do some extension into the real world. So, you know, popular conlangs in media, maybe how underdeveloped they are compared to real languages. Some are even very overdeveloped. I can think of a language that is just absurdly overdeveloped called Ithquil. Course objective, something practical. So the process of making a conlang. So this is, of course, interesting. And maybe something like, what do we need? What don't we need? And this ties into real languages. So the skill set here might not be applicable in everyday life, but for people who are interested in creating their own media, books, fiction, fantasy worlds, D&D campaigns, this could be a pretty useful course for them and gives them insight into how language actually works. So we're kind of killing two birds with one stone. We're tricking students who are into fiction to actually learn about real languages and how those systems work. So the next bit is course assessments. Now, when I don't have to do exams, I don't do exams. I don't have to do exams, so I'm not going to force any exams in this course. But what I do want, two X's there, that's weird. What's happening in this row? There we go. With course assessments, there's some things I always like doing. So I always like doing some sort of in-class percentage points because I don't just talk for 3 hours. I always give little assignments, but practice problems, discussion questions, something to keep people engaged. And I think through the in-class workshops that I was thinking about, this is a good way of doing things. I don't know what percent I want to give to that yet. We'll figure it out. There's definitely going to be some assignments in here. We have to do some sort of assignments that they can take home and think about. And then, of course, we have that constructed language project that they're going to do on their own. Or, I don't know, maybe they can do it in pairs. That's undecided at this point. But with the Conlang project, When you assign a big project, there's always a question of how do you grade it? Do you can grade it all at once, or can you grade it in components? So when I think about grading a conlang project where they're creating their own language and we're doing topics week by week, I want some sort of check-ins to be done. So partial work. So maybe we'll do something with partial work. We'll do a completed project, and then maybe we'll do like a mini presentation in groups, small groups, just so they can get feedback on work on stuff. So it's actually kind of convenient. I had 3 lines there. So we're going to need to break this up into components here. So what weight do I want to give? Usually with workshops and in-class stuff, I don't like to give more than 10%, but 10% seems pretty good. And then maybe an even split between assignments and the conlang project. I don't really know about that. I feel like I want assignments to be more. So if I do assignments 50, I can do constructed language project as 40%. That seems pretty nice. For partial work, I don't know, maybe 25% completed project. 20% completed project, 15%, and a mini presentation, 5%. That way, the majority of the work is given beforehand, and then at the end, they're just really producing a document. And they're not adding too much to it, but they are sort of going back and looking at feedback. So this could work to me. I'm sure I'll revisit this 100 times, but again, when you make an outline, you're really just sort of thinking very preliminarily what's going to happen, and these things will change constantly as you start developing lecture slides and all that. So for a weekly schedule, I have 13 weeks in an exam period. What I always do is I always make the final project due in the exam period because that way they don't have to get it done while they're still finishing up their lectures. So what I might think right away is how do we deal with submitting partial work for a conlang project and doing assignments? So I don't have my topics yet, but I do have a rough idea of when assignments should be in. So assignment 1 usually around week 4. Maybe because it's very early on in the semester, we can do an assignment around week 6. I'm thinking about week 9 as well. That's a 3-week break. And then for the 4th assignment, I like 4 assignments. That's usually a nice amount to do. Probably 3 weeks after that, in week 12, we'll have to adjust it. Now, with the check-ins, the partial work for the final project, well, we do want things coming in at a reasonable pace. So I want people to start pretty early to start building their projects. So maybe we can do a final project check-in 1 in week 5. Maybe in week 8 we can do one, and then maybe in week 11 we can do one, and then I'll always save the presentations for the 13th week. Usually the presentations don't have to be on a completely finished project, but it should say what you've done so far and what you plan to do, just to give room for feedback. So a little plan there. Now, as far as topics go, I have thought about this in advance because it's important to not make this video like 2 hours long and me thinking like, what do I want to do? So usually the intro lecture is always in the first week. So this would be something like, what is language? And because we're talking about constructed languages, we want to talk about like, what is world building? So just to get sort of the basics down, get people thinking about a language, get people inspired as to what they want to do. Do they want to make a language for people who are human or non-human? Like, what do they want? Is it a fantasy world? Is it a sci-fi world? Like, what are they thinking? And because this is a linguistics course, there's a nice uh, stream of how we teach things. So we'll always start by talking about sounds. So the sounds of languages that are used, a little bit about the biology. We'll talk about sound groupings, so how we can group sounds together to make syllables and things like that. We could go straight into words and sentences. But before that, I want to introduce something that's a little bit more preliminary for the project. So I might think about talking about different writing systems in a week. So all the different writing systems that are used in the real world and in constructed languages to show them how creative some languages can be. In week 5, if we talk about writing systems, we can also talk about number systems because not every number system in the world is base 10. Like in English, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then we start again, 11, 12, 13. But there's some languages like French, instead of 80, you say 420s, and 87 is like 420s and 7. And similarly, in constructed languages, you might have binary. So if you have 1, 0, that's actually 2. If you have, sorry, if you have, yeah, 1, 0, that's actually 2. If you have 1, 1, that's actually 3. 1, 0, 0 would be 4, and so on. So we'll do something on number systems. That'll be a nice break, especially early in the course, to get people in their writing system, learning it, learning how to use it. Then we can talk about words. Um, yeah, words. I think about 2 weeks on words because words can be quite complicated. Words and sentences can blend in some languages. Some languages basically have a single word that has the meaning of a sentence, while other languages have different sentences. So we can split this into a 2-part lecture over 3 weeks, a part on words, a part on sentences. In fact, with sentences, we have to think probably even longer about that because there's things like questions, there's things like relative clauses, like these are sentences that describe nouns. There's a lot that go on in sentences that we should probably spend a lot of time on. We do need to talk about meaning in a way. So probably 2 weeks on meaning, 1 week on literal meaning, and 1 week on non-literal meaning. So I don't know how useful this will be because people know meanings in advance. So actually, when I think about the practicality in a course, the standard linguist in me wants me to do this. But when I think about the objectives for the course, I think what's probably more useful is instead talking about pragmatics. So this is like social meaning. So we can do that for a bit. We talk about things like metaphor, uh, different markers that people use in languages to signal whether a sentence is like a fact or if it was heard from someone, honor systems. Maybe we can, in week 11, talk about sociolinguistics. So things like gender markers, age markers, social status, like the TV distinction in French, things like that. And then in week 12, this is a presentation week in week 13, so we won't do anything there. So we'll call this the wrap up week. And then in week 12, well, once we've covered that, introducing all this stuff in constructed language throughout, um, I think I want to give them Ithquil. Why is that in blue? Incredible. I guess this is what I get for taking an outline from a different course and eliminating things. So Ithquil is a constructed language that has like every linguistic concept you'd ever need wrapped into one language. So this could be a fun deep dive that we could spend a couple hours on. And with all the background that they've learned in the previous 11 weeks, this could be something that is built up into. And then in the exam period, obviously there's no class. So I would expand this a little bit to figure out exactly what topics I want in each week. And usually what I do is I write questions. Because when I have questions, I can work on answering those questions through slides and through activities. So I might ask for sounds, something like, like what are sounds and how do we produce them? So this might be something that people don't know much about. If we're talking about a group of sounds that are used in a language, we have something called a phonemic inventory. So I might answer the question, what is a phonemic inventory? Following up, so what is English's phonemic inventory? What sounds do we use in English? What about other languages? So real or conlang. So this could be how I structure a lecture. And then for the workshop in this course, which I'm thinking about, it could be go to that one website that I can't remember the name of and listen to sounds, decide on some sounds you want in your phonemic inventory for your own conlang. So maybe this is a good workshop so that people can spend times and they can ask questions about it to me if I'm still there, because I'll still be there. It's during lecture time. So they can get some clarification, talk with friends. If they want something that's like traditionally a harsh sounding language, I can give recommendations. If they want a language that sounds more bubbly, whatever that means, I can probably find some sounds for that. So some content and then some practicality. And I would go through this and do this for every single week to make sure that every lecture has an informative part, an analysis part looking at real and constructed languages, and then a practical part where they start to work on their own stuff. Now, for course components, this is usually when I take the grading and I expand a little bit more on it. So I had in-class workshops, I have assignments, and then I have the Conlang project. So this is what they're going to be doing as like the final project in the course. So I just think about my rough goals for this. So for the class workshops is work on starting your conlang using the content from that week, ask questions, work in groups, things like that. And as far as what I want them to do for me, maybe submit minor proof, and then I'll give requirements each week, very small, so that way people don't have to commit to anything big, but just to show they put in some effort. For assignments, I have a goal with these, and this is to use concepts in class to analyze real languages and constructed languages. So this might be finding languages on your own. This might be analyzing languages I give you. This might be something to do with critical thinking, or maybe it's thinking about linguistic universals. So does a language follow it or not? Universals, linguistic universals. So something practical, something that is relevant to the course each week, that lets them practice and will hopefully inspire them to create their own languages. So they might see some problem sets and they see, oh, I really like how this language does this thing. I want to use this too. While another person might look at that and be like, that is disgusting. How dare a language do this? I don't want to do that. So for the Conlang project, make Conlang. There's going to be some check-ins, I'll call them. I called them partial work earlier. Final submission and a presentation. So for the check-ins, so partial work submitted, let's say 2 to 3 lectures worth of material fleshed out, given criteria. So I'll give criteria. Again, I'll work on this in the future. This might be changed, but this is good, especially with 3 check-ins. We get about 2-3 lectures in between all of these. For the final submission, all lectures worth of material in a final document outlining the conlang and how it works. So maybe something like a grammar guide with examples. So that way someone who's reading their conlang is able to produce it themselves and maybe expand upon it. And for presentations, just talk about conlang so far in small groups, introduce interesting aspects of it, stuff you found interesting and are excited about, get feedback. So yeah, this seems like something that's pretty practical. I've been doing presentations in the last weeks of all my courses, not in front of the class, but in small groups. And it seems to work really well. It's like this nice little social event at the end of the semester where people can chat to each other. The presentations aren't too serious, it's more for them. And it's just really like, did you do it or not? So the last thing to look at before going back and revising literally everything 1,000 times is the grading scale. Now, my department is pretty strict with grades, which means that like an A plus is usually around the 96-97% range, and then there's like a 4% change there. I do something pretty interesting in my classes, which is for anything under 70%, I give a C, and I don't like to give C minuses, D's, or F's. The way that I give C minuses, D's, and F's is when they miss work. So if they do all of the work in the course, I don't care what grade they get a C. But if they get less than 70% and they start missing work, that's when the grades get lower to C minus D's and F's. So I'm not too harsh of a grader. For things that are right or wrong, I mean, what matters is that you've done it, you've gotten the right answers. But for conlang projects, it's like how accurate are they being, how good's the writing. So maybe for this, I'd do like a 96%, and then every 4%, I cut down a letter grade. That should be 84%, 80%, 76%, and then that would be down to 70%. So this might seem strict, and students look at this a lot and they're like, oh, that's pretty strict. But I know how I grade, so in the end, it's not too bad. So this is what we worked through today. This is how I design courses. This is how I outline courses. My next step is to produce slides for these things. And then once I've constructed all my slides, I come back, I revisit the syllabus, and then I start making adjustments for how practical I think things can be. This is very idealistic at this point. I don't know exactly what the full plans are, how it's going to play out yet, but at least this is something that I can work with to start building my slides. So I hope you found this video interesting. We're looking at a Word document and thinking about processes of my brain. Every instructor is going to be different, but yeah, this is what I do. I find course construction to be incredibly fun. It's a lot of challenging, like how much can I teach that's interesting while still maintaining, the integrity of the field, but also giving some practical stuff. How do I make it fun? How do I grade fairly? How do I keep people engaged? There's a lot of questions that go on, and the outline is really the basis for all of this stuff. So if you have any questions, like in general, about what I think about, how I make courses, how things usually go, feel free to put them in the comments. I love talking about teaching. I love talking about teaching more than I like answering questions. I like doing both, but talking about teaching is something I can never stop doing. So feel free to ask. And yeah, hope to see you around the channel watching other videos where I actually teach stuff.